Good evening. I'm Corvallis Advocate Assistant Editor Emily Ratcliffe, and co-moderating with me tonight is publisher Steve Schultz, who serves as president of City Club of Corvallis. Welcome to tonight's Cityspeak Forum. These forums are co-presented by the Corvallis Advocate and the City Club of Corvallis. The Advocate offers fresh news daily online, these town hall meetings, and will soon reintroduce the same comprehensive weekly events calendar that it had been publishing before the pandemic. Our co-presenter, the City Club of Corvallis, is a volunteer-run nonprofit organization that seeks to present a diversity of viewpoints and constructive dialogue. Steve?
Thank you, Emily. Partial funding for these Cityspeak town halls comes from Peak Sports and First Alternative Natural Foods Co-op, but we couldn't present these forums without you. If you're not yet a subscriber or a donor, please consider hitting our website, and the subscription levels are at either $5 or $10 monthly. They are about to go up by full disclosure for everyone, but it's only going to be a whole $5 a month. It is an opportunity to do something that is increasingly rare in this country: support an actually locally run and managed newspaper. You don't find many of them anymore. Rare still, folks that support that. So I want to put out a really big shout for those of us in our community that are supporting this effort, either through donations or sponsorships or subscriptions. It really, man, we feel it every time that somebody new subscribes. We feel it every time that you renew. Really appreciate it. For those that aren't subscribers or donors yet, do please consider hitting our website. Thank you so much. And Emily.
Thank you, Steve. So tonight, Cityspeak hosts the 7 remaining candidates vying for the Democratic nomination to replace Congressman Peter DeFazio. Whoever wins this primary faces Republican Alex Skarlatos in November's general election. Skarlatos is currently unopposed in his bid for the Republican nomination. This weekend, the Corvallis Advocate will issue their endorsement in this race and others as well. Unlike the Advocate, the City Club of Corvallis doesn't make endorsements of any kind. Candidate Andrew Kolek will actually be joining us about half an hour in. So what we'll first do is we'll ask each of the candidates to just briefly introduce themselves and their experiences as they answer our first question. So we will actually start with Sami Al-Abdurrabba. Sami, if you could just give a quick introduction of yourself, and our first question for you would be, if you find yourself in a majority Republican Congress, how will you be effective in that environment? 2-minute answer, please.
Thank you, Emily, for the question. And my name is Dr. Sami Al-Abdurrabba, former school board chair, current school board member, and I lived outside this country. When I lived outside this country, I saw threats to basic human rights. I understand the power and promise that our democracy holds. In Congress, especially if the GOP takes over the House, I will stand up to anyone attacking our rights. I am an engineer, educator, experienced elected official. I believe that housing and healthcare are human rights. We will win and we will defend our rights when we focus on the kitchen tables problems and issues that everybody's talking about. And that's why I'll work toward solutions like Medicare for all, upgrading our infrastructure, no matter which district you live in, red, purple, blue, bridges are still bridges, schools are still schools, and they all need to be safe. We need to address income inequality and make sure we address the existential crisis, climate change. I will fight for democracy, the voting rights, access for all, protecting us from attacks on democracy here at home and abroad. So when the GOP, if the GOP, not when the GOP takes over, I will make sure we stand up for our basic human rights and make sure our democratic institutions are preserved and protected. And I'll fight for the things that we care most about. And I look forward to talk about them in detail and question in my answers. However, I want to conclude with this. I'm asking you for your vote and support. And while we're speaking, look up samiforcongress.com, because I bring the diversity of the opinions, perspectives, and experiences that I will use when I go to Congress. I work with community, and that's the work that I look forward to when I serve you in Congress.
Thank you, Sammy. So now we'll move on to Val Hoyle. Val, just a brief introduction and let us know how will you be effective if you find yourself in a majority Republican Congress.
Hi, I'm Val Hoyle. I'm the Oregon State Labor Commissioner, and thank you. When I was first elected to the legislature in 2010, we had a 30-30 tie in the House, and we did not have a working majority in the Senate. So I actually know how to be successful when you don't have a majority, and that is meeting people where they are and really focusing on the needs of the district. The fact is, this district isn't just Eugene and Corvallis. It is 250 miles of the coast with some very conservative areas, some very progressive areas. But the things that Republicans and Democrats can agree on generally have been infrastructure, investment, jobs, working families, and good standards for these things. The current Republican Party, I mean, you can't cooperate with people that just want to destroy government, but fundamentally, I know that I can be successful whether or not in the majority. And a lot of times when you don't have the majority and you have a majority that's trying to do bad things and take away our rights, you have to know the rules to be able to stop bad things from happening. Quite frankly, I'm the only person that served in a legislative body. I'm highly effective as a legislator. And that is why I've received the endorsement of Peter DeFazio, Jeff Merkley, Ron Wyden, and every state legislator that's endorsed in this race, because they've seen me be effective. And the best way to help is to make sure that we don't lose the 4th Congressional District and we keep it Democratic. And I'm the person to do that.
Thank you, Val. And now we'll move on to Doyle Canning. Doyle, same with you. Brief introduction and how will you be effective in a majority Republican Congress?
Thank you so much for having me here tonight and putting on this very special conversation about this monumentous once-in-a-generation election. For 20 years, I've worked as a progressive policy strategist facing off with Wall Street banks, big polluters, billionaires, and the politicians that they pay for. And I'm under no illusions that powerful interests in Washington will give up without a fight, or that we have time to drag our feet when it comes to the climate crisis. My record of progressive leadership is consistent, and that is the leadership that our district deserves in Congress now. When a fossil fuel company wants to bulldoze Southern Oregon to build their pipeline, or billionaires are squeezing their workers while paying close to nothing in taxes, or a Republican legislator pushes laws to criminalize abortion care, as Democrats, we should organize and we should fight back, but we shouldn't be surprised, because that is what fossil fuel companies and billionaires and Republicans do. We should be shocked and outraged by when politicians look the other way, let them get away with it. The climate emergency trumps attacks on our democracy, poverty, the housing crisis in our community, the threats to reproductive health, decades of racial injustice, all are too urgent for us to continue to wait for politicians who have shown us that they will side with the powerful while taking their money. That is why I'm running for Congress, because we deserve a Democrat who is unbought and unafraid. And as for a divided Congress or losing the majority in Congress, I'm not giving up without a fight and will work in every day in every way I can to elect Democrats. But in that case, I would say Congressman DeFazio has been exceptionally effective at being able to work in a divided Congress to get things done for our district and deliver investments in rural Oregon that uplift our communities. And that will be my priority, to continue his record of excellent constituent services, advocacy for veterans, and being a strong voice for our district. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Or excuse me,
I'm Doyle.
I'm sorry. That's what I meant. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Doyle. Now, moving on to John Selker. John, same with you. Brief introduction and how will you be effective in majority Republican Congress? 2-minute answer or less, please.
Thanks so much. Well, I'm a professor at Oregon State University. I've been here for 31 years. I was an extension agent, researcher, and teacher. And I actually innovated a lot in teaching, made new whole testing methods that have been widely published and widely replicated around the country. In my work, I've become known through my work in 22 countries and across Oregon and the United States for innovation in managing water primarily. Why do I want to serve in Congress? I will be the only earth scientist in either the House or Senate put together, and I want to put earth first. I will bring 40 years of educator experience to the House. I will put education first. I was a lead caregiver taking care of my wife after her terrible accident, and I know how to put patients first. I know what we need to change in our medical system. And it's time really for a change in the Congress, that we have to have people who understand Earth and understand science and engineering to be able to solve these problems. With respect to working with Republicans, last week was amazing. I got an unexpected email from an old friend, and not an old friend, really a colleague at OSU. And he said, I'm a Republican, John, but I served on committees with you, and your integrity and what you did on those committees, I wish I'd been able to do, and I am supporting you. And he added to my campaign. And then this farmer in Junction City who I'd worked with, I did research on his farm 25 years ago. And we got in a conversation, he invites me down and he said, look, I'm a Republican, John, but the way you explain things and what you're trying to do and what you're trying to do for natural resources, that's what we need to do. And he took a sign and he donated to my campaign. And that's not because I'm not a progressive. It's because people are dying for solutions. They want solutions, and I can give them solutions based on real facts and real truths. And I think that is going to be my experience in the rural areas is going to really pay off in the final general election.
Thank you, John. Next, we have Jacob Matthews. Jacob, same with you. Brief introduction, effectiveness in a majority Republican Congress. 2-minute answer list, please.
Thank you. My name is Jake Matthews. I've worked with John Kerry for president, Hillary Clinton for president, Deval Patrick for governor, and also member of parliament Celia Barlow back in London. And unfortunately for those from those experience, I know exactly how little gets done from our elected leaders. Unfortunately, right now, the ability to effectively pass legislation is actually intertwined with the popularity. So whoever the freshman congressman is who gets elected has to rise to the popularity of an AOC, an Ayanna Pressley, like a Cori Bush type overnight. The first thing I'll do as your congressman is to peg my salary against the per capita of our district. Right now, we are the poorest district in all of Oregon at a per capita of $24,000, while our Congress people get $174,000 per year. So I'll make sure that I only take the $24,000 that our average citizen takes home. And with the rest of the money, over the last 2 years, I've been working with a family in Afghanistan since May 2020 to help them get out of the country as their children are actually set for execution. I'm going to use the rest of that money to help get them out and show the world exactly how much a freshman congressman can do. I've been working with the State Department, with Congressman DeFazio's office and 2 other congressmen's office, and they've run out of options. And one of them actually recommended that I do human trafficking. This is the way that your Congress runs. In other news, I'm a multiple gun owner. My grandfather was a farmer. I'm a hunter. I'm a sailor, and I'm a pilot. I got my pilot's license right here in Corvallis. And having a Republican-controlled House will not affect my ability to pass effective legislation for our district.
All right, thank you, Jacob. And now for Tommy Smith. Tommy, introduction, effectiveness in a majority Republican Congress. 2-minute answer list, please.
Hi, thank you for having me here. My name is G. Tommy Smith. Please call me Tommy. I grew up here. I'm a working class individual who earns an hourly wage. This is the battle that we're fighting. Is there's a whole side of this country who is using terrible means to destroy our democracy. Our Congress has grounded to a halt. Is one of the main reasons why I decided to run. I believe that I can reach across the aisle and talk to people on the other side. I think given my background and being a working man, also being a veteran of 10 years in the Navy, and I have faith. I'm a Christian. I walk a certain path. It's not always the straightest path, but I do walk a path. I don't try to force my beliefs on anybody else. I do believe in the tenets of, love thy God with your heart, body, mind, and soul, and love thy neighbor. And so, my only job as a Christian is to love everyone. And so it's just saddened to me when I look and see our current political landscape and Christianity is being used as a weapon. And not a single one of them actually knows the teachings of Christ. Not to sound preachy, and I apologize if I do, but I think that gives me kind of a leg up on things, is that I can go and talk to Republicans and I can talk to them on that level. When they start talking their nonsense, I can talk to them scripture. I think that's something that has to be done. Just like what Jacob said, you have to be elevated. You have to be able to call these people out for who they are and what they're about. You got to make as much noise as possible. And I believe I'm the one that can do that. And I just thank you for your time. I'll wrap it up. My name is Tommy. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tommy. And I'll hand off this next question to Steve.
Thanks, Emily. Tommy, I'm going to start with you on this one. I'm going to be asking each of you the same question. If you make it to Washington, you only get to choose one committee, which isn't true, we know that. But if you only were able to choose just one committee, what would it be? Don't need the why, just which committee. Got around 10 seconds to answer. I will start with Tommy.
Thank you. I would be on the transportation committee. That would be my first choice.
Jacob. Jacob.
Sorry, this is a tough one. I want to do two of them, but I'll pick one. I want to be on the budget committee, but I think I even more want to be on the House Science, Space, and Technology committee.
Okay. And I'm going to move over to John Selker.
There we go. Yeah, it's tough, but I think I would do the select committee on climate crisis.
Okay. I'm going to move over to Doyle Canning.
Thank you. Of course, I'd go for appropriations, but I'd take House Natural Resources. Thank you.
Okay. Going to move over to Val Hoyle.
The 4th Congressional District has had a long tradition, even before Peter DeFazio, of having a strong voice on transportation and infrastructure. And so transportation and infrastructure.
Sammy.
The national void that will be created by the retirement of Peter DeFazio needs an engineer, someone who studied accidents and can hold the companies.
So which committee?
So I will be choosing the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee.
Infrastructure. Okay. And Emily, back to you. Thank you all.
Thanks, Steve. So now heading into specific issues, let's start with the environment. What will you push for to address climate change? Doyle, let's start with you with this question. You have 2 minutes to answer.
Thank you. I appreciate the question, and my interest in serving on the House Natural Resources Committee is because my background as an environmental lawyer and a community organizer working in the climate movement for 20 years is my expertise, and I have a strong voice and a lot of support from the environmental movement in my candidacy. I have a vision that our district can lead the country on climate change. We have some of the most important forests on the planet for carbon sequestration, as the forestry school at OSU has told the world, with some of the most cutting edge research happening in the climate space today. We also have in our federal waters off the South Coast the most promising real estate for offshore wind energy development in North America. And the opportunity to stand up clean energy investments here in the 4th Congressional District that create good union jobs on the coast and in rural Oregon and cool our climate. And that is my vision for bold climate investments that will both reduce fossil fuel pollution and cool our climate with the power of nature-based solutions of carbon sequestration. There are some real differences in this race in terms of environmental priorities and background. My campaign accepts no funds from the fossil fuel industry, and I'm a proud signer of the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge. That is because of my commitment to being clear-eyed and courageous in the face of the climate emergency and in the face of the deep corruption in Washington that is the fundamental barrier to passing sound climate policy before it is too late for our climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Doyle. And Val, same question, 2-minute answer or less, please.
Thank you. As most, well, maybe you do, maybe you don't know, I came into politics through the labor movement. And so I have always focused on ensuring that we can have good jobs. And too often the fossil fuel industry has put out a false narrative of having to choose between protecting the environment or having jobs. So part of the reason I want to serve on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee is to make sure to bring the dollars back to Oregon. Oregon State is one of the leading, institution on the West Coast in developing green renewable energy technology, whether it's with the Wave Center or reducing the carbon intensity of making cement and concrete. I think that these things other people may find boring, but fundamentally we have an opportunity, and the opportunity is now that we have to address climate change very seriously, whether it's the droughts or the fires or the heat dome. We've seen it and we see it here now. But in order to ensure that we address the climate crisis as the crisis that it is, we need to expand our base, right? Beyond just dyed-in-the-wool environmentalists. We need to convince people up and down the coast in our conservative areas, rural communities, cities, that this is something we have to address, and we can do it in a way that does not leave workers behind. I have these relationships. I am the only person in this race to have passed environmental legislation, whether it's clean fuels or moving us away from coal power. I passed that legislation. I made sure it passed the floor, and I'm committed to ensuring that I will not support new fossil fuel infrastructure, or nor am I taking fossil fuel contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. And Sammy, same question, 2-minute answer or less, please.
Absolutely. I can tell you about the things I've done and what I can do, because my actions prove a track record of someone who's qualified, both from a technical perspective and also policy and legislative and investments perspectives. In communities across Oregon, and especially in the district, we're seeing the real impact of climate change in terms of droughts and forest fires. My whole PhD is around emergency management decision-making when we have a large-scale crisis. And the case study was wildfires. So I'll be advocating for legislation that protects folks from wildfires. And natural resources are so critical for us, and we need to manage them appropriately. Look, climate is the existential crisis of our time, and we need to act on it through a systems thinker, someone who advocated and did that work locally. I did bring interjurisdictional and intergovernmental agreements here in Corvallis to build solar panels, resilient and energy efficient buildings. And we have seen that kind of leadership and accomplishments locally and statewide. And I have advocated for that work. So if you want to advocate for a better deal for the next generation, let's look into our children in the eye and say, we will elect people who understand climate, who understand it technically and passionate about this topic. And I believe I'm that person. I have the technical expertise, and I have the policy understanding, and I have the long-term vision that we need to divest from fossil fuel and create jobs for everyone all around the district in order to have a sustainable economy and better environment.
Great. Thank you, Sammy.
Thank you.
Tommy, on to you. Same question, 2-minute answer or less, please.
It's me. Oh, sorry. Well, this is a huge issue, isn't it? The big environmental one. One of the things I think that we definitely need to do, especially given the fact that every summer we have huge amounts of smoke that goes into the air, is to do, we have about 6 million acres of forest that needs to be dealt with some restoration to it. I believe this can also increase some jobs for our local logging and mill companies, as long as we don't do clear cutting, but we do clear out some of the underbrush and everything else like that. I think that's definitely key for our area. Some of the things that I would think is the carbon tax. As long as corporations are allowed to pollute our atmosphere, they need to be paid and paying and paying and paying to the point that they want to stop the amount of CO2 that they put into the air. I think that we need to eventually get to a point where we ban all single-use plastic. It said something about like we have so much little tiny pieces of plastic in our bodies currently. That just to me is mind-blowing. I think we need to do expansion of electric vehicles. We need to do everything we can to stop greenhouse gases going into the air, everything that we could possibly do. I think we need to also stop the high concentration of farm animals in small condensed areas. One, it's not humane for the animals to live in those kind of conditions. And on top of that, the environmental hazards that they create when being in this high concentrations is just devastating to the environment. As your congressman, I'm going to be fighting for these things. I'm going to be fighting for the air. I'm going to be fighting for the water. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Tommy. Now on to Jacob. Same question, 2-minute answer, less please.
Free to cut me off when I hit my 2-minute mark. Climate change needs to be fought in how we design our cities. So we're going to build a green, renewable, smart city right here in our district. I should say in the same breath that this is not a purchase like a road or like a bridge. It's an investment opportunity that gives money back to our district and to its citizens, lowering their taxes, whether they choose to live in the city or not. So our farmers, loggers, teachers, nurses, all of us will see a financial benefit from this. It's already being done all around the world in Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Latin America, and right here in the US in the state of Arizona. Our district can get ahead of this curve and actually be a leader on this new frontier. Other than redesigning how we build cities, the only other real way to solve climate change is to have an economic effect on the major polluters and the politicians accepting money from the major polluters, like our front runner Val Hoyle happily does. This is where our carbon dividends come in, and it works like this: we put a hard cap on the amount of money. We put a hard cap on the amount of carbon we allow into the economy. Permits to this cap would be issued, and the energy companies could buy them in quarterly auctions. When they run out of permits, they can't extract or import any more carbon polluting fuel. Now, how do you prevent the average Americans from being clobbered at the gas pump from this? That's where the carbon dividends come in. The revenue from selling the permits will be distributed back to the public as direct payments, no strings attached. This is already being done in Alaska, and it's had an 85% rate of success. Carbon dividends were actually first proposed back in 2009 in a bipartisan bill, and subsequent plans have come from both Republicans and Democrats. Is that the wrap it up sign? We treat gas prices as something out of our control, giving dangerous amounts of power to petrostates like Russia with alarming consequences. By weaning ourselves off gas independence, we'd gain relief from dirty air that kills millions globally, especially minorities, Black, Brown, and the indigenous communities. Furthermore, companies like Exxon, who have known since at least 1977 that fossil fuel would harm the planet. But
I'm going to cut you off here, Jacob, just because your time is up, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you. John, on to you. Same question, 2-minute answer, less please.
Yeah. Everyone wants to have an end to climate change. The question is, who knows how to do it? The key issue in terms of going to renewables is linking our entire continent energetically so that when renewables such as wind and solar are not available in one place, they can be used in another place. And if you look right now, the price of energy in Los Angeles in the afternoon is negative, and while people are paying $2 to cook dinner in New York. So there's literally about $300 billion a year that's being lost right now. To build the interconnect costs $150 billion. So it'd pay for itself in 6 months. Why isn't it being built? It's not being built because people had the wrong mindset. They thought the US government had to pay for it. In fact, what the US government had to do was actually get the right of ways so that we can build it. And so we can have people who are, have private industry jump in and have a concessional rights to put this in, and we can get that done immediately. Furthermore, when we talk about why we have not achieved a zero carbon in Oregon, we need to only look to California. The way we do this, and we will do it nationally, is you set standards. You simply say, that's what the federal government does. We make rules. And so we say, you will produce this fraction of your energy without carbon. And you ratchet that up. And it turns out that because wind and solar are by far the cheapest forms of energy generation right now, utilities are completely able to do this. And so just like California, we ratchet this up, but we have to provide both the infrastructure to make it feasible and the rules that make it necessary. And with these pieces in place, we will cut our carbon use. And that's what's happening in California. Now over half of their energy is carbon free. So a lot of the federal mandate of being in Congress means looking at things continentally. It's not just about thinning forests, unfortunately. We have to actually look at the continent, identify our problems, and identify what our role as House members is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. And it looks like Andrew Kalik has actually now joined us. So Andrew, let's catch you up to speed on the questions that have been asked so far. So we're going to give you 2 minutes total to answer these questions. The first being, if you're in a majority Republican Congress, how will you be effective in that environment? And the other question is, what will you do to, or what will you push to address climate change?
Great, thank you very much. And sorry to be late. I was having events in Corvallis and Paloma today, and now I am driving back to Eugene to put my kids to bed. So I apologize if the audio is a little shaky, but I'm glad to be with you all. Briefly, what do you do as a freshman, particularly as a freshman in the minority? I think there are two fundamental things you can do. One is build relationships both within your party and across party lines so that you can start to create a network that can support progressive policy over the long term. There's no time like being a freshman and being a backbencher to build relationships with people across the aisle and within your own party. So I would do that. Second, but certainly not least, constituent services is an enormous part of this job, regardless of whether you're a freshman or a tenured member of Congress. And so I would focus on making sure that the people of the 4th District could navigate the bureaucracy of the federal government, get the benefits that they are entitled to. And I think that's an incredibly important thing at any point in the Congress member's career. Secondly, on climate change, I want to echo support that Jake mentioned for carbon tax and dividend system. I think that's the best way and most efficient way to get us where we need to go to reduce fossil fuel use and do so in a way that's just. And then the second thing I want to mention on that is that from my perspective, every bill is a climate bill, and you need a member of Congress who thinks about it in that way. How can we leverage the must-pass bills every year, the Farm Bill, the defense authorization, the transportation package, to advance climate justice? That's what I'm going to do. Plenty more of the specific ideas are on my website, andrewkalik.com, but I think you need that perspective in order to move the ball. So thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. And also in just 10 seconds, could you just answer, if you could only choose one committee, what would it be?
I want to continue Peter's legacy on transportation and infrastructure. T&I.
Okay, thank you. So now moving on to our next question. What do you see as your top policy priorities for people in our district, specifically young families and children, people with student loans, and senior citizens or elderly folks of limited means? Val, let's start with you. 2 minutes to answer this or less.
Like my entire career in public service, and also for the 40 years previous, starting out working in the organizing in the labor movement, all of the issues that I work on start with working families. So cost of childcare. When we had our children, my husband and I had to work split shifts because we could only afford 2 hours of childcare a day. The cost of childcare is critical. The cost of access to healthcare. We need Medicare for all. We need to lower prescription drug prices. In terms of seniors and young people, and employers, what I hear over and over and over again is the high cost of housing is prohibitive. So we need to build more housing, and we need to make sure there's affordable housing. And one of the most important things, as I said, Medicare for all, but keeping our promise with Social Security. If you look at Rick Scott, Senator Rick Scott out of Florida, what he has said, he said the quiet part out loud. They want to take away Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. We have to lift the cap on Social Security payments, because fundamentally the wealthy aren't paying, and Social Security is a promise and can be funded. But again, we have to lift the cap on the Social Security payroll tax, which really hasn't been lifted at all since the start. And that is critical and important.
Thank you, Val. Sammy, same question, 2-minute answer or less, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you asking this question, because the people all across the district want kitchen table topics to be discussed in an election. So they know their member of Congress is going to work for them. And that's what I'll do. For the senior citizens, I hear a lot about the need for Medicare for all. And I understand how we can expand it and transition to a system that's high quality, affordable, and accessible for all, universal. I want to start with increasing access to vision, dental, hearing, mental health, and prescription drugs, lowering their prices so you can afford them and you don't declare bankruptcy just because of an illness or injury. The cost of housing is so high, and $877 Social Security income is not enough to pay half of the rent for a family, not to mention other important expenses. We need to protect Social Security, and my plan will not increase taxes for anyone who's making more than $400,000. And we can accomplish that. The students, thank you for asking for the students. We have bailed, not me, but America have bailed Wall Street and said, it's okay, it's an investment. And we paid the price. Many people couldn't stay at their homes with that bailout. How about we invest in this generation? We offer free community college, free 4-year university, public university access, and cancel student debt. So you can start a family, you can start a new job or new business idea. And we bring America to the entrepreneurship and innovation that it's always known for. In conclusion, I want to say infrastructure is important, and I'll be talking about it more in a following answer, because it is the building block of a fair society and equitable and sustainable country. And we need to start building a nation, going back to building a nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. And Doyle, same question, 2-minute answer or less, please.
Thank you. This question makes me think of one of my supporters, Ashley, who lives down in Coos Bay. She is being evicted from her home to make way for a commercial Airbnb. I've heard that story up and down the coast. The affordable housing crisis in our district isn't just in Eugene and Corvallis, it's in smaller towns and communities all over our district. And I am proud to say that I was a co-founder of a national movement called Homes for All after the foreclosure crisis that evicted millions of Americans from their homes. A national movement of housing policy and advocacy and community organizing groups got together and said, how do we make sure this never happens again? And we forged a plan and a path to reform federal housing policy that is now our signature legislation in Congress, the Homes for All Act, which I will be proud to champion as your member of Congress to build public and permanently affordable housing, 40 million units across the United States. This isn't a new problem. The housing crisis in Oregon didn't happen overnight. It's because of a dereliction, a failure of leadership from politicians in our state over the last decade or more that has allowed the crisis to get to the place where we are now, and we need leadership. I am also very committed to protecting Social Security and expanding benefits, as others have mentioned, a bedrock piece of the Democratic platform. I also support Senator Warren's plan for universal child care. And that is why I have the support of the Progressive Campaign Change Committee, who boosted Senator Warren's first run for office to become the senator from Massachusetts and take out a Republican incumbent. I also support student debt cancellation, Medicare for all, and have every Medicare for all endorsement in this race. Single payer PAC of Oregon, Medicare for all Lane County, Progressive Democrats of America.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doyle. And Andrew, same question, 2-minute answer or less, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a millennial, and as a millennial, I have faced many of the challenges younger Americans have. I graduated from law school with six-figure student debt, as did my spouse, and we get a child care bill for about $2,500 every month. And at the same time, as we were trying to pay those bills, we were trying to save for a home. And we are among the luckiest millennials you'll find. We were able to pay those bills, paid off our student debt at 35, was able to purchase a home in our late 30s. But so many people can't. That's obvious. And we need people with that experience who are going to bring that perspective so that there's some urgency behind this. Because there clearly has not been in many corners of Congress. And whether it's student debt or housing, there's a lot of ideas on my website, again, andrewcallick.com, that you can look at, but just mentioning a couple. On student debt, I was very lucky to be a graduate of a law school that had an income-based loan repayment system. My first year out of law school, I worked at the ACLU and made $27,000. My law school paid almost every cent of my loans that year. When I moved to government and made more money, I paid a little bit more, right? It was an incentive system that made it clear that I could do anything I wanted with my legal education. And that's exactly the type of program that we should have nationwide for any college graduate or grad school graduate. So I think an income-based loan repayment system is the way that we do this best. Now, finally, on seniors, we've talked about Social Security. I think we're in alignment, of course, of the importance of indeed expanding Social Security, and I would raise that income cap on the Social Security tax all the way to $1 million. But there's also a number of different things we can do to improve the lives of seniors. And I hear this all around this district, how people are waiting in line for hours to get a prescription if they're lucky to have a pharmacy in their community at all. And so I think we need to do more to loosen regulation around mail order pharmacies. I think we need to enable.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off here because your time is up, but thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. John, same question. 2-minute answer or less, please.
Yeah, I'm a baby boomer and I had student loans and I paid childcare and I did all those things too. I'm not quite sure about the generational aspect there. So in the spirit of debate, I'll just throw that out there. But in our district, we are not beyond a fragile state. We are in essentially a crisis state. If you look at the housing situation, we have almost no housing available. I was just on the coast, and it is true that the B&Bs, the short-term rentals are sucking up the housing stock on the coast, and that's really causing problems among the people I talk to. So the housing situation is critical. We have to address it in a number of ways. And I don't have time to talk to all of them now, but that is a top priority. The other thing is medical. And of course, single payer and Medicare for all is great, but we have to recognize the fact that we don't have providers. People cannot find doctors in much of our district. It's a desert of medical care providers. We have to invest in our community colleges for nurses, and we have to look at what's going to be required to get good medical facilities distributed down the coast. They are not there. People are not able to find doctors, and that's a disaster. In terms of mental health care as well, if we want to deal with our communities and we want to make them a place we love to live, we have to have the infrastructure there. We don't have any detoxification centers for people who are addicted to drugs to help them get off of drugs. And we don't have the mental health care facilities in place. Those have to go in place as well. Finally, there's the issue of tsunamis. And we have, I think I have 15 seconds left, but we have a situation where all of our old cities are built in tsunami zones, and we have to build infrastructure to protect them. It turns out you can combine some of these things and have the tsunami protection be part of the mental health care and be part of the social fabric. And so these are some of the things I'd like to see happen.
All right, thank you, John. Tommy, same question, 2-minute answer or less, please.
Well, there's a lot of things we can do to help, working families. I think one of the things is there's a lot of stagnant wages. We tell kids that they have to go to a 4-year school, and in a lot of cases, that's very beneficial to people. But we can actually add an additional 1 million jobs tomorrow if we instituted on-the-job training programs throughout this country and throughout this district. Another thing that that I would like to talk about, especially when it comes to healthcare and everything else like that, we need to have universal healthcare. I had a customer to come in, and she was in her 90s, and her husband has developed Alzheimer's, and he wasn't quite ill enough to go into a state-run facility for help. So she received a bill for $100,000, and that was like their whole entire life savings. And she was talking about how she would have to go out and get a job in her 90s just to live. And that is the modern day tragedy, isn't it? And as your congressman, I'm going to do everything I can to fight for everyone in our district, for Republicans, for Democrats. I am a working person, so I understand the struggles of everyday people. And I will do everything I can to work for Oregon families. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. And Jacob, same question, 2-minute answer or less, please.
And cybersecurity. These are the two biggest issues right now facing our district right now, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Our per capita is now at $24,000. That's the poorest in the state. This per capita does not mean the homeless or the unemployed. It means there's an overarching rigged economy here. 1 out of 5 doctors who we regard as having some of the highest salaries, are actually quitting the profession now because the money simply isn't there anymore in an economy that's completely rigged against us. Meanwhile, we have a Congress that regularly has a 19% approval rating year after year, yet we keep electing them. We have a Congress that makes $174,000 per year while we suffer. They never fail to vote for their own raises. We have a Congress that's allowed to engage in insider trading, making hundreds of millions of dollars while we suffer. This is on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrats. We need to peg the salaries of our elected officials against the per capita of the constituents that sent them to that office. While we suffer, they suffer. When we succeed, they succeed. And this will incentivize them to bring in better, higher paying jobs to our district. We simply can't have a Congress that is so painfully unaware of the issues that plague us now in the 4th District, with things like cybersecurity, malware, spyware. Our youngest youth and our elderly are particularly affected by this because they tend not to know the latest in tech, so there's predatory service against them. This is going to be the next 9/11. The next 9/11 will not be fought with nukes. It'll be fought on our phones. This will be the next World War II. We already have overwhelming evidence of this. Mohammed bin Salman personally sends spyware to Jeff Bezos's phone. If those 2 men are not protected, how are people like you and I? And what is Congress going to do to actually protect us? Nothing. No matter what you hear today from any of our candidates, nothing will get done unless we fix how Congress works. That's my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. And I will hand this next question off to Steve.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, so for all of you, let's move to antitrust and consumer protection, especially with big tech getting bipartisan attention of late. What will be your priorities in this particular area? 2 minutes each. I'm going to start with Andrew.
Thanks. This is incredibly important for the sort of entrepreneurial engine of America, because what antitrust is supposed to do is level the playing field and make sure that there's not big regulatory capture by the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, the companies that own all of our data and as a result exercise enormous market power. And so we need a Department of Justice that has teeth, that is well-funded, and that has modern 21st century antitrust laws that are not based on the cost to a consumer. Because of course, what Facebook says is our services are free, but that's not what the power is about in the modern economy, right? You can offer a service for quote unquote free, but in fact, you're exercising market power in advertising and all these other ways. So I think it's important to modernize our antitrust laws. In addition, though, I think we need to pass laws and have the perspective in Congress that we ensure that compliance with internet regulations are not so onerous that it actually prevents entrepreneurial small businesses from getting into the game. Because right now, the way the big guys have set the table is that you need an army of lawyers to comply with anything, whether it's the California Privacy Act or beyond. And so what we need are common sense reforms, but that are simple and easier to comply with, and that don't stack the deck further against small businesses in America. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and move to Doyle Canning. Same question. Antitrust, big tech.
Thank you so much for the question. I agree with Senator Warren that we need to break up big tech and would champion her plan to pass legislation that prevents tech platforms from both owning the platform and competing with small businesses that use that platform, as Amazon is currently getting away with. That's why, unlike my opponent, I don't take money from Amazon lobbyists, nor am I a lobbyist for a big tech company. I also support appointing regulators committed to reversing illegal and anti-corruptive tech mergers. I'm a big fan of Biden's appointee to the Federal Trade Commission, Lena Khan, and her scholarship in the antitrust space, looking at how antitrust laws, came to be in America in the Gilded Age because of the ways that the railroads and the robber barons were just having a chokehold and making, in those days, what now would be billions. And we have our sort of own robber barons of today in Silicon Valley in the big four tech companies. And that's the fundamental issue here, is the inequality in our country and the ways that billionaires and big corporations and their army of lawyers and lobbyists are writing the rules in their favor. And they do that because they make big contributions to candidates and have that kind of capture over our political system. That's why I don't have a cryptocurrency super PAC who is boosting my candidacy. I have progressive organizations because I'm not going to Congress to do the bidding of billionaires who want to keep their tech platforms unregulated and oppose Biden's tax plans. I will be a strong champion for consumers, for Oregonians, who are the ones who get to decide who we send to Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll move over to Val. Oh, you're muted, Val.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, you'd think at this point in the pandemic, I'd know how to unmute.
We all do the same thing.
So, we've seen throughout history of this country is when large corporations are allowed to gobble up smaller competitors and use anti-competitive practices to become monopolies, consumers and workers lose. And that's where I come into this. I won't claim to be an expert in this area at all, but I do know that antitrust regulations are an important way for Congress to ensure a level playing field for businesses, for workers, and for consumers. And on this issue, like every other issue I work on, I'm led by my values, how these policies impact working families, and how we can ensure that everyone succeeds in our economy, whether it's protecting people's data or ensuring that these large companies don't get away with hurting their workers by misclassifying them or not paying them. I'm the only person here that actually, in my current job, has held Amazon and Facebook to account by enforcing the law and making sure that they protect their workers, that they're not misclassifying their workers, that they're paying their workers. But in Congress, we fundamentally need to ensure that these billionaires who are using their money to go fly into space, while we've got people here that are working 3 jobs and just barely getting by, that's wrong. The income inequality is wrong. And fundamentally, we need antitrust regulation. We need to ensure that workers are supported, and we need to ensure that our data is kept private.
Thank you, Val. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move over to Sammy.
Thank you, Steve. This issue is huge. The impact on it will affect affordable services and products and fair competition. And when it comes to big tech and the information industry, democracy can be on the line. We need someone in Congress who, if they were in 2008, would say, hey, we need to make sure we can control this from getting out of hand and giving the big tech control over democracy and access to the voters for right information. Right now, in Canada and Europe, your consumer information is protected and browsing information is protected more than the United States government protects your freedom for your personal information. And that's wrong. We need to stand up. The risks of unchecked regulation is huge. And that means big companies can control information, sell your private data. I have done this work protecting workers and making sure we craft policies that protect people. And as someone who knows how technology works, I believe Congress needs to upgrade their understanding of thinking forward, how antitrust laws and big tech needs to be regulated in a way that's fair for consumers, fair for users, and increases the competition rather than makes some rich billionaires have monopoly around politics, monopoly around how we consume information. So I thank you for sharing this important question, because it leads to so many problems we have. And we need a systems thinker, a critical thinker who understand how big tech works and is capable of holding them accountable. And I believe that would be me.
Moving over to Jacob.
Thank you. This is a great question. Teddy Roosevelt would be spinning in his grave if he knew how large and hegemonic our companies have become. They're right now oligarchic, borderlining on actually being monopolistic. And I agree with Andrew on this, that the Department of Justice needs to be able to have some teeth in this matter. One of the key parts of this is something called interoperability, which is the seamless transfers that a user's data can have between two platforms. For example, in Facebook, you'll be able to transfer your information from Facebook to a competing service there, so that Facebook is not in complete control of your data. It's a dynamic start to avoid smaller companies from not being able to compete with the big tech giants. The interoperability, if we propose this as a bill, would also apply to business informations, and that means that third-party sellers on sites like Amazon could more easily take advantage and have their listings and reviews on other marketplaces. Right now, it's not really you're not really able to do that. So a third-party seller on Amazon has to stay on Amazon. This is actually, one of my degrees was in this, and I actually wrote a paper about this back in college. We're seeing now companies rise to a level that we've never seen before, and at a pace we've never seen before, such that people can't keep up with them. And the fees, especially the lawyers' fees that are attributed to this, are just too much for small companies to be able to rise up. And even small things like on your remote, if it says Netflix on it or Hulu or Sling, that's actually a monopolistic thing that they're doing, and they're actually not allowed to do that.
Moving over to John Selker.
Yeah, we think we're unique, but actually we play the same record over and over somehow. You look at the breakup of the trains, you look at the breakup of the steel, you look up at when I was a kid, AT&T, it used to cost $1 a minute. In fact, it cost me $3 a minute to call Chile when I took my job and started working in Chile. And everyone was like panicked that we're going to break up AT&T and things are going to heck in a handbasket. It didn't quite work out that way. We immediately were calling Chile for 10 cents a minute. Now, the situation with the tech companies has grown to the same proportion. When you have, as pointed out, Amazon, which is really, cornering and using predatory practices to get market share so that it can corner the market. Same with Uber, and even looking at the cryptocurrencies, in fact. So we have to make rules of operation. That's the government's job. We see things that are going south and we say, hey, we need to make a rule so that this doesn't, so that industry and economy serves society rather than the other way around. And so it's time to say, well, what type of rules we want to make? And let's look at crypto for a second. It was shocking to realize if you buy a cup of coffee with a Bitcoin, that transaction uses as much carbon as flying from Portland to DC and back. It's over 1,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide to implement the security measures. These sorts of things can't be allowed, and they are being allowed because people are not looking at them, and Congress is not taking responsibility for addressing them. So we are a country of rules, we're an economy of rules, and what we do is we make rules so that that we are served, not the companies, and then the guys with the sharp pencils always figure out how to get their money too. But yeah, we really are in a deep hole on this one, and we have to make a new set of rules to make this whole thing much more fair and transparent.
Emily, back to you.
Thank you, Steve. All right, so actually, Steve, I think you actually skipped someone. I think you skipped Tommy. Oh, No. You're muted, Steve.
Tommy, if you got skipped, please do go ahead. I think I did skip you. Please go ahead.
Not a worry. One of the things that people hate about politicians is that they're not honest. And one of the things that you'll know about me is I'm probably a little too honest. I don't really know a whole lot about this, at least from the perspective from the average Oregonian who knows about antitrust and big tech in that manner. But it's not to say that if it's not a huge issue, that I wouldn't be willing to learn. But just on the subject itself, just by what little I know, we do have a problem with at least with major social media sites who seems to not control content when it's dangerous, or to identify dangerous content in enough time to say stop a resurrection, but what am I looking for the January 6th insurrection. Thank you so much. So, I think that's a huge issue amongst our country. I think that's the average Oregonian would be concerned about something like that. And that is definitely something that we need to rein in. What we need to do on that, I don't know. Some of the other subject matters on big tech or anything like that, I think we need to spur innovation, have lower barrier to entry into tech. That way we have a better broad range of industries and spur innovation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tommy. Sorry for almost skipping you there. Emily, thank you for catching that, and back to you.
All right, thanks, Steve. All right, so next question. How will you as a representative impact economic opportunity and housing in our district? Val, let's start with you. 2-minute answer or less, please.
Excellent. Thank you. I actually, this morning, did the ribbon cutting at the Knife River Training Center in Albany. That is the 17th largest dome in the world and the largest facility of its kind on the West Coast, where they're going to train people to, weld underwater and, so many different things, for a place for young people to learn through apprenticeships where they get paid while they learn, and again, get certified classroom instruction. I think expanding the apprenticeship and training model for the 50% of jobs that need more than a high school degree and less than a college education is really something we should be leaning into. In terms of the housing crisis, it is indeed a crisis, and I will continue working with the delegation, the federal delegation, on funding things like the Benton County Crisis Center, right? We need to have a housing first model here in Eugene. We've gotten every single veteran access to housing through a housing first model. So finding housing that is affordable and then providing services so people can stay in their home, whether it's seniors or people that are struggling with behavioral or mental health crises. Fundamentally, if we fund programs like the Benton County Crisis Center and invest in housing and invest in housing vouchers so that people don't have to wait decades to get into public housing, those are things the federal government can do. And quite frankly, they've walked away from their responsibilities, both in housing and in mental and behavioral health care.
Thank you, Val. Sammy, 2-minute answer, less, please.
Thank you. So this is a very close to my heart topic. I have invested in pre-apprenticeship programs and career and technical education, bringing back to the economy about $1 million of lifetime income for those who would have been dropouts. But now, by investing in equitable education and making sure that children have access to opportunities like my colleague Val mentioned here, they can have a passion and the skills to access jobs. But also we need to tackle the problem in terms of investing in infrastructure. Rural broadband, everybody should have access to the internet so they can access jobs or healthcare or education. That will create prosperity and access to housing in different places around the states. I agree that we need to work on this, and I have done this work locally. The McKinney-Vento Act is close to my heart, report that we do every year. And we stepped it up here locally by saying the federal government says, just report about homelessness. We did a little bit extra work and said, here's what we will do about homelessness. We're also investing in supporting families navigating the vouchers. And I want to make sure those vouchers are not 18 months to, I heard 7 or 9 years from one of my colleagues, waiting time when you get the voucher. We want to make sure people can access those vouchers, they qualify for them, and then they can afford something with them. And that's a very important aspect to the problem. It doesn't take an economist to say supply should be equal to demand. We need to supply affordable and low-income housing. The federal government should support local communities to develop housing for teachers and community members. And that's what I'll do. And I've done that work locally here by providing the workforce through construction programs where students at the high school level, they're ready to build tiny homes.
Sorry, Sammy, I think I'm gonna have to cut you off here. Yeah. Now moving on to Doyle, 2-minute answer, less, please.
Thank you. In the worst days of the pandemic, I was working for the labor rights organization United for Respect, which organizes workers at the 2 largest private employers in the United States, Amazon and Walmart. We were preparing for a meeting with the incoming Biden White House labor advisor, who wanted to discuss our priorities for essential workers. Anne Marie Reinhardt Smith was our voice at that table. She had spent 30 years working department store retail jobs for close to minimum wage. And as we prepared for the meeting, I asked her, what is the most important thing that you want to tell the White House? And she said, we need a $15 minimum wage now. We can't wait. And I share this story with you because those words haunt me now and drive my campaign for Congress. About 8 weeks later, I learned that Anne Marie Reinhardt Smith died of COVID-19. She was one of millions of Americans who had to risk their lives during this pandemic for poverty wages just to keep food on the table, while companies like Amazon and Walmart made tens of billions in profits. That's why I am in this fight, why I'm on your side. Oregon can't wait for a leader in Congress who is unbought and unafraid to stand up for strong unions, better wages, affordable housing, Medicare for all, student loan debt relief. I want to share that I grew up on a dirt road. I call myself a dirt road Democrat. I know what it's like to feel left out, left behind, to commute long distances to get an education or to get groceries. And those are the Oregonians that I will fight for in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Doyle. Andrew, 2 minutes to answer, less, please. Andrew, we can't hear you. Can you hear us okay?
Sorry about that. I didn't hear my name. So there are huge swaths of this district that have been completely left behind in the 21st century economy. And that is not unique to the 4th district. It's happened across the country. We have small pockets of prosperity, and often that prosperity is, of course, as we've discussed, limited to higher income folks. And we have huge areas where they are in desperate need of investment and a diversified economy that provides a sustainable future for their community. And yet we have a tax code that continues to funnel money into luxury development, housing, and otherwise, in communities that don't need taxpayer support. And I think that that's backwards. And so as a member of Congress, one of the first things that I will do is fundamentally reform the Opportunity Zone tax credit program that spends taxpayer money on luxury housing development, as well as business development in places that don't need it, and redirect those funds to small business development in our communities. This is incredibly important for the future of our economy. In addition, we need to continue to support structural changes that allow people to unionize. I think most folks on this call would agree that there are some great green shoots in the labor movement. We've seen them right here in our state at places like Starbucks and, of course, across the country with the recent Amazon vote. But we need structural changes to allow more and more workers to get access to the middle class through unions. My parents were public school teachers. They were members of unions. That's an incredibly important component of building a middle class, and I think we need to support it. And then lastly, we need to invest in education. And there's been a lot of discussion about career and technical education, a lot of discussion about apprenticeship programs, and those are incredibly important. But we also need to make sure that our kids know how to read. And right now in Oregon, we are next to the bottom in terms of literacy rates. Kids should have a choice to do what they want to do with their lives, whether that's go to the career and technical education route or go to college and go on beyond that. It should be a choice for kids. And that means we need to focus on the essentials. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Sorry, you're out of time. Tommy, same question, 2-minute answer, less, please.
Yeah, so some of the economic opportunities or housing issues that are going on in our district is pretty extreme. There's a total lack of housing in all over the place. And how can we solve this? Well, we can start with changing some of the zoning laws that we have in our district and each county to where we stop with the single family homes and get to multi-family homes. Some of the things that we also have to do is we have to start developing a transportation like high-speed rails or anything else like that that can transport people outside of high-density communities out into rural areas. Now, what that would do is it would allow those areas that don't see a whole lot of economic boost or anything like that receive a new amount of tax and revenue come in from people who are generally work in cities and stuff like that, but can then transport out to rural areas in little to no time to live out there. I think that we can do something like that. As far as economic opportunities, that's one of them. Another thing that we could possibly do is I talked about a little bit earlier was on-the-job training programs. I met a girl in school who was trying to get a degree in floristry, not forestry, floristry. And you would think that would be something that she wouldn't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on to learn, that she could learn it inside, with someone who does it. And I just think that we need to be approaching education more like that instead of just force feeding textbooks. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. And Jake, 2 minutes or less, please.
Thank you. We need to be focusing on how we build cities. Cities in the future are not going to be the way that they have been built in the past. Cities in the past are built linearly, so they have an extraordinary amount of waste in it, and that's why it's so expensive to build up the housing there and the roads and all that stuff. Cities of the future will be built circularly, and we have a lot of technology and science behind this already. And as I had mentioned in the opening, it's already being done around the world. So the actual architecture and the actual, building and the economics of it have been going on now for about 7 or 8 years. So we know what works and we know what doesn't. The green, renewable, smart city that I propose that we build in our district will see eco villas that use 72% less energy. It'll have a 3 square mile solar array using low carbon cement, 90% recycled aluminum. Water and energy consumption will be down by 40%. There'll be a 10 megawatt solar array as well, which will offset 15,000 tons of carbon emissions. And the houses for 400 square foot will be about $200,000 to cost to build it. This is the way that the world is going to be in about 5 to 15 years. Our district can get ahead of this science and technology at the early part of the bell curve here. And whether one chooses to live in it or not, we'll see receipts from this lower our taxes. So it actually benefits everyone, including the loggers, the farmers, everyone, the people that don't normally vote for our party. It'll help out everyone in our district. Sorry, and also this will raise the per capita from the $24,000 to $100,000 at least by 2030. You can read more about this on my website, whynotoregon.com.
Thank you, Jake. And John, 2-minute answer, please.
Thanks so much. I started my own business. I run it still. We're spinning off 2 new companies out of my lab at OSU with undergraduates leading them, and I'm just giving them advice. It's economic opportunity comes about in Oregon when we innovate. And one of the cool innovations that came out of the type of engineering work that I do was Orenco. Orenco is down in Sutherland, Oregon. They have 420 employees making the most energy efficient water treatment systems in the world. And they're exporting them around the globe right now to Europe, all across the United States. But they are desperate for workers. We need to have the community colleges and others train the people to do the type of labor that pays good wages and makes this innovative technology that saves energy and allows for lower cost housing by water treatment being more affordable. A lot of the housing issues are going to need to be handled at the state. We have to make land available. The state has to figure out how to incentivize this. But at the federal level, there's an embarrassment. Once again, we seem to have administration by incompetence. And so we have these voucher programs. They look all lovely, but we underfund them so that the people are waiting forever to get their vouchers. And it's right there on the website. It's like, oh yeah, you may have to wait a couple of years. What the heck? How are you supposed to get housing that way? So this administration by incompetence has to end. And we see it throughout our government at this time. Particularly immigration and all of our embassies are understaffed. And across the country, including the IRS, we have lack of quality administration. And that is costing our country every step we take. And that has to end. So our economic opportunity is tied to the quality of our governance. And that's an area I really want to work on.
Thank you, John. All right, so moving into social justice. How will you, as a representative, push for equity and advocate for historically marginalized groups? You have a minute to answer this question. John, let's start with you.
We have an incredible legacy of injustice, and we first and foremost have to live up to that. The amount of looking at what happened to the Native Americans, African Americans, and many immigrant groups, including the Chinese, for instance, Jews. Lots of people have suffered. Almost every ethnic group suffered at some point. And we really have to recognize that it is still in our society. And we have to absolutely put it as part of our educational system, that we teach how to treat each other, and put it in our laws that anyone who violates people for reasons of race, religion, sexual orientation will be held to account. These have to be fundamental. And finally, training our police officers and training all of our public workers so they know what is right and what's wrong, and they are held to account to respect those people.
Thank you, John. And Jake, a minute.
And the only difference that I noticed between my Black students and my white students upon graduation, I'd ask them, so what do you want to do? What do you want to major in? What do you want to be? And my white students could name about 300 jobs. I had to finally stop them. And my Black students could name probably 3, of which one of them was rapper, one of which was basketball star, and the other one student had a connection in Hollywood through his dad. And we got to think about what those statements mean. That means that their economic outlook on the world is extraordinarily limited based on what was taught to them and what they know is out there and actually available for them. Hiring practices by these corporations need to change. Redlining, gerrymandering districts, this all has to change, because the same economic opportunities that's available to maybe me or a Caucasian person needs to be seen as being available for everyone, no matter what your race is, what's your sexual orientation is, what's between your legs, who you go to bed with. It doesn't matter. What should matter is how much work input that you have into it.
Thank you, Jake. Tommy, a minute.
Thank you for the question. This is a really important question because there's way too many people who are hurting out there. And we all of us, even if you don't get elected, need to work for a better place. You know, one of the things that we need to teach way more is hope. And I think that we can provide that. I think that police officers need to go to 2 years of school. I think after graduation, they need to go work in a correctional facility for a minimum of 6 months to learn body language and deal with people outside their own communities. I think that we have to reteach America what it's like to be a minority in our country. I think we need to have a strong leader that can reach across the aisle and reach towards Republicans who don't think there's an issue going on, and actually show them and teach them and talk to them by how things are. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. Andrew, a minute.
Thanks very much. Racial justice has been a major component of my career. When I was a civil rights attorney at the ACLU, I was part of a team that won a lawsuit that pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into public defender services. This was in the state of New York. Something we failed to do in Oregon, and that is unfortunately costing defendants of color in this state and so many others. I also was able to leverage both the courts, the legislature, and advocacy in the streets to put an end to unconstitutional stop and frisk policing. And then I also focused on racial justice when I was in government as a policy advisor, pushing to make sure that we had environmental justice, that we were citing facilities like waste transfer facilities, not just in the Black and Hispanic communities that they were historically in, but also in white communities where and when it made sense. And I was also the lead author of a report that talked about how government can help minority and women-owned businesses by having more of the investments from government into those companies. So this has been a major focus, and even at Airbnb, I work with the NAACP to bring the opportunity of home sharing there.
Andrew, your time is up. Thank you. Doyle, a minute.
Thank you so much. I have spent my career working for racial, economic, gender justice, and environmental justice. And I believe that Democrats win when we stand strong in our values and we are explicit about our commitments to undoing the harms of racism in our country. I have worked to build coalitions to stand strong for the rights of immigrants and oppose racist policies like 287G and Sheriff Arpaio's Show Me Your Papers law in Arizona back in 2010, building a coalition of domestic workers, day laborers, young dreamers coming together to take a stand, and found the movement that we now call Families Belong Together. I talked earlier about my work in the housing rights space, and also would like to mention my work for environmental justice. The fight to oppose the Jordan Cove pipeline is often talked about in terms of white rural landowners, but one of the strongest voices against the project was the chair of the Klamath Tribes, former chairman John Gentry, because of the environmental racism implicit in the project.
Time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next, Sammy, a minute.
Thank you, Emily. I have the lived experience of receiving threats and attacks and still seeking office. And I'm one of many board members of color or parents who are serving their community. And we have to be courageous. We have to make sure that America and Oregon is a home for all. And that's the work I've done in my local elected office capacity. Our performance in our district is phenomenal. We are closing the opportunity gap, where graduation rate is way higher than the average of the state, 90%, with parity with the Latino students. And there is still more work to do. And that's why, as a caucus of color statewide leader on social justice, I'm the president of, we tripled our membership. And I want to make sure we serve together to create policies that heal the painful history of America and build a just and equitable nation. So we have a duty to do this work together. I'm willing to be on it. Thank you.
Val, a minute.
Okay, so I think representation matters. So one of the things that I have always done in public service, and certainly when I was in the private sector, was hire people that look like the communities they live in. So at the Bureau of Labor and Industries, we changed our hiring policies to outreach to different communities. So when my wage and hour director, who grew up in farm worker housing, is Spanish speaking, goes to investigate farm worker housing, she looks like the people who live there, and she's of the same culture. So there's trust. We've been able to help our workers more. Also, I've always paid my interns, because I know that if you only bring people on into politics, teach them how to campaign, help them in that ladder to become an elected official, you can't just hire the people who can afford to work for free. So those are just some of the things that I've done and I would do in Congress.
Great, thank you, Val. And I'll hand this next question off to Steve.
Right before the last question, I'm going to ask everybody to keep this to about 30 seconds. Are you for the Local Journalism Sustainability Act or not, or at least some sort of legislation that would voucherize subscriptions specifically for local news? I mean, there might need to be some kind of audit process where, yes, they're always got a reporter at the Board of Ed, they've always got a reporter at County Commission, they've always got a reporter at City Council. But basically, you're getting the question, voucherized subscriptions and maybe the Local Sustainability Act. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with Jacob. Jacob.
Yes, I do. I do support this or some version of a voucher to help out the newspapers and the local news. Absolutely.
Thank you, Jacob. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to move over to Tommy.
Journalism is the fourth branch of government. It's absolutely important. Of course, I support it.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to move over to John Selker.
Yeah, there's been studies that have shown when local papers fail, corruption increases right from the city level on up. And, you know, we've seen with NPR that it's an incredible resource, but the local resource has to be there as well. I'm not familiar with exactly the rules you're talking about voucherizing this, but it makes good sense to me. We have to rethink how we
yes or
fund
no
it.
on local journalism sustainability act?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to move over to Andrew.
I don't know enough about the Local Journalism Sustainability Act to say, but I definitely think we need to invest more in public media.
Okay, quickly, voucherized subscriptions, yes or no?
No.
Okay, I'm going to move over to Sammy.
So I support DeFazio co-sponsoring the act last September, and I'll do the same, and hopefully I'll get it out of the Ways and Means committee next year. I believe democracy dies in darkness, to quote the slogan. Unfortunately, a newspaper have adopted out of a First Amendment case ruling, and as a local elected official, I know you hold us
appreciate
accountable,
the
and I'll
answer.
support
I'm going to
it.
move over to Val Hoyle.
Thank you. I agree with Sammy Aladreba. Democracy dies in darkness. I'm a hell yes on supporting it. And I think that we need more local journalism. The loss of local journalism has hurt us a lot.
Thank you. I'm going to move over to Doyle Cannon. Lastly.
Yes, it reminds me of Oregon's campaign financing tax credit. You know, if you want to have a strong democracy, we need to support people in being able to support the publications and the local candidates that make our democracy work.
Thank you all. I'm going to hand it back to Emily for the last question. And then after that, we'll need just a couple of minutes for the candidates privately after the all clear. Emily.
Thank you, Steve. So in closing, each of you have 30 seconds to answer 2 questions each. What is the one thing not talked about this evening that you wish had been discussed and why? And why are you the right candidate for Oregon's 4th congressional district? You have a minute total to answer both of these questions. Doyle, let's start with you. A minute.
Okay, thank you so much. I wished that we had talked more about how we are going to build a strong movement to defeat the Republican candidate, Alex Garlatos, in November. And I believe I'm the right Democrat for the job. And we'll move right into the second part of your question, because I believe that as Democrats, we win when we stand strong in our progressive values, and that our strongest candidate is our strong progressive who's been consistent on the issues from the get-go. I am the strong progressive in this race, with the backing of a broad coalition of veterans, of rural communities, of the college Democrats on both campuses, of a dozen environmental organizations. And we run a risk as Democrats if we run a hand-picked, billionaire-backed establishment Democrat against a Trumpist Republican. That's a risk that we cannot take, and that's why I'm the strongest candidate in this race. Thank you.
Thank you. Val, moving on to you. A minute.
Thanks. I think voting rights, because if we don't get voting rights dealt with, we will lose our democracy. That's fundamental, and that's true. Overturning Citizens United and getting voting rights. Why I'm the right candidate? You know, have been serving as an elected official in this district for nearly 12 years. I've knocked on tens of thousands of doors in this district. I've received the endorsement and earned the endorsement of Peter DeFazio, Jeff Merkley, Ron Wyden, the League of Conservation Voters, every single labor union that has endorsed in this race, Planned Parenthood, and many others, because I have delivered, not talked about, not advocated for, but I have delivered on progressive values. And I have won in districts like Curry and Coos County, and also all the progressive districts. So I have won, I will win, and I am the strongest candidate.
Thank you. Moving over to Andrew, a minute.
Thank you. I would love to talk a little bit more about where we disagree with institutional Democrats, because I think the hardest thing to do in politics today is to poke your own political bubble. In fact, it's easy to pour rhetoric against the other side. You can even fundraise off of it. But I think what's important is making sure that we hold ourselves accountable to the people, not standing up and bucking the party for a donor, but standing up and bucking the party because we think it's what's best for the people. And this goes into your question about who's the most electable against ALEC. The Oregon electorate is extraordinarily frustrated with the status quo. They're extraordinarily frustrated with insiders. And ALEC is going to beat that over anybody's head, particularly if we nominate someone who is perceived to be exactly that. And so I'm trying to be different than that. I'm trying to bring nonprofit, public, and private sector experience to the table. And I'm hopeful that that is the combination that'll lead to a victory in November. Thanks.
Thank you. And Sammy, 1 minute.
We need someone who understands the risks to losing our civility in public service and in our democratic institutions. I have seen it firsthand. I know what it looks like when human rights are curtailed. So we need to start to see it, and we're starting to see it here in America and Oregon. We need to elevate civility and hope in our democracy, return to civility. That political theater in Washington, D.C. needs to end because it's costing us our democracy. It's costing us our families being divided over politics. We need to support our local leaders. It's costing local leaders their safety. I believe I'm the strongest with my experience, passion, and I have delivered as well for my community very well. And so I will for the American people and Oregonians in all counties in this district.
Thank you. And Tommy.
A couple of the topics I would have liked to talk a little bit more about was our Native American community. Some issues close to my heart, the veterans issues that's going on there, and money in politics. My campaign, I have vowed that I will not accept any donations over $100. I believe that I can win without getting big money. Reason why you should vote for me is because, you know, I'm just your average day guy. And I think we need a new, you know, type of politician, a new generation of politics who go in there and speaks their minds and reminds people about what it means to get things done in this country, and that we've done it before and that we can do it again. And I think it takes a special brand of person that can be able to talk on a level keel on that, understand where they're coming from. My name's Tommy. Thank you for listening to me. God bless.
Thank you. John, a minute.
Yeah, the question of truth and facts in governance and social discourse. You know, we used to make sure that there was truth in our quote unquote news, and that needs to be reinserted, and that needs to be talked about. With respect to why I'm the best candidate, great group of people, by the way. I mean, I have all the world of respect for everybody on the circle here, but you can't learn stuff on the job. And so I have worked in agriculture, I've worked on climate change, I've worked in education, I've worked in business, I've worked in technology, and I've been a problem solver in medical care. These are the fundamental problems we're addressing. And we've had a lot of platitudes and kind of standard line kind of solutions. We have to start from a basis of understanding, not from lobbyists, but from our personal understanding. And I think that on that range of issues, I'm a little bit older, but that's because I've taken the time to learn a lot about a lot of these pieces. So I'm looking forward to serving you guys.
Thank you. And Jacob, 1 minute.
Thank you. I would have liked to have talked about the Connectome project. This is a project that was funded by Obama, but not by enough, in my opinion. It maps out the human brain, helping each and every one of us to understand ourselves a lot better and why we make the decisions that we do, what ails us, anxiety, depression, bipolar, PTSD among our service veterans, loneliness among the elderly, addiction, things like that. It's the next space race. It's the next frontier. Without this blueprint ourselves, we're just taking shots in the dark on how to solve what ails us as a species. I'm the only one who can beat Alec because, first of all, I'm a multiple gun owner and a hunter myself. I mentioned that because all he seems to talk about is guns, except for the other, and he doesn't seem to have an opinion on the countless other issues facing our district. But furthermore, and more importantly, my plan economically benefits our farmers and loggers. Our party ignores them, and it's not fair to them. When we support them and they support us, we can win this district and we can keep it blue.
All right, thank you. Thank you all again. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us tonight and having these discussions with us. The Corvallis Advocate endorsements will be published this weekend. Steve, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Emily. Also, a big thanks for our advocate staff and the folks at City Club of Corvallis for all the work they do, make these town halls possible. Please check our site for upcoming City Speaks. Also, archives of past City Speaks. This will be available immediately after as a video for anybody who couldn't catch the whole thing. Thanks again to Peak Sports and First Alternative Natural Foods Co-op for supporting these and viewers like you. This City